On the same day that I had received a call from Mina, Rufus Winchester had driven his hybrid electric car across Hyde Park towards Mayfair in the perfect summer sunshine. Tall, regimental, upright and buttoned down, this former British Army officer was an energetic and blustering serial entrepreneur who had survived a string of botched business startups. Things had never come quite right for Captain Winchester, but now he thought to himself, we're about to hit the big time. His company, ECF, had finished its first fundraising and had signed up nearly 100 million euros from investors. Together with his partners, an assortment of earnest, well-meaning and moneyed Englishmen, he had rented a large Georgian mansion in Mayfair as an office and set about hiring a team. Just like an old boys' club, the new headquarters had a ballroom on the first floor with high, corniced ceilings, but all the real work took place in cramped attic rooms, where the juniors toiled behind computer screens, hedging carbon credits in the city. Downstairs, the founders floated about between oak-panelled meeting rooms with an effortless self-confidence that comes from a good public school education. Excitement about carbon credits had just taken hold of the financial markets, and ECF's fundraising had been splashed across the front pages. Winchester took in a deep breath, pushed back against the steering wheel and smiled. He was in the right place at the right time, and he knew it. Immediately after the first 100 million euros rolled in, ECF had turned its attention to China. Winchester knew that over the past 2 decades, thousands of new businesses had sprouted up along the coast of China, and that together with the old state-owned factories in the Rust Belt cities of the north, they were cranking out greenhouse gases like there was no tomorrow. It was fertile ground for Winchester's new firm, and in a couple of months his team had found several big projects in China. By the summer, they'd initiated their first transaction. It was a landmark deal to buy a big tranche of carbon credits from a chemical factory in Critchlow, the biggest ever attempted by private investors. There wasn't enough money in their first fund to cover the contract, so they had to go out and find more. Eventually they managed to syndicate the deal with their chums in the city. It had been 3 months of exhausting and stressful work, but they finally lined up investors. Deutsche Bank had agreed to underwrite the financing, and they were ready to sign the contracts. It was a real coup. A big chunk of the first 100 million would be invested well ahead of schedule, and the investors were happy. But much more exciting was that they had circles around another 500 million euros from some big European pension funds to put into a second, much larger fund. Just close that deal in Critchlow, Winchester thought to himself, and the money'll come rolling in. If we get those Dutch pension funds signed up, we could end up with $1 billion, and we'll be the largest carbon fund on the planet. It looked as though the last pieces were sliding perfectly into place, just at the right time. But then they got a message from Critchlow. Chief Engineer Wang had called unexpectedly from the chemical factory and said that he wanted to change some key terms in the deal. When they heard about Wang's last-minute demands, the investors in the syndicate started to waver. It seemed as though the entire financing structure would collapse. The millions that Winchester had lined up from the Dutch pension funds started to crumble in his hands. It looked as though they might lose everything. A few hours later, I got the call from Mina. At the end of the conversation in the carriage just outside York, Mina had insisted that I drop by at her offices as soon as the train arrived in London. I could see from the address that ECF was located in one of the most expensive areas of London, so I had hesitated. I'd come down to London to see friends, and had expected to go to a meeting. I was covered in stubble and in need of a haircut. My glasses were twisted out of shape from one of the children standing on them, and I was wearing a pair of torn jeans and a thin cotton jacket that was a bit ragged about the elbows. But I had an hour or so to spare, so I took the tube over to Mayfair. ECF's offices were in a long row of handsome merchants' houses near to the American